In this video I'm going to show you how I made this pair of steak knives with Wenge wood and copper inlay. I started with some 01 tool steel. I designed the knife on my computer and printed it off onto some label paper and stuck this straight onto the steel. I've made a few knives before, but this time I wanted to challenge myself to make a matching pair. I used the angle grinder with a 1mm cutting disc to rough out the shape, and took this over to my bench grinder with the stone to get rid of any of the sharp edges left. I wanted to make a matching pair, so I used some double-sided tape to hold the two together. I wasn't sure how well this would work and it ended up sticking together for the whole time. At the belt grinder I continued to shape the blades to roughly where I wanted them to be. On the printer I'd marked where I wanted the holes, and I used a centre punch here. This just helps the drill bit go exactly where I wanted it to. At this point the steel is annealed, which means it's nice and soft, so drilling through is quite easy. You definitely want to make sure to do this before you heat treat the blade. Then we get to the bit I was most worried about, adding the serrations. I used a round file and just started to add them in, working down the full length of the blades. At this point they're still stuck together, and this is going to make sure that both blades are identical. Now this was done, I could split the two blades up and start working on the bevels. I made a quick bevel jig using some angle iron and nut and bolt. This ended up working really well, and I think next time I'm going to spend a bit more time and come up with a really good design. Once I had a rough grind I was happy with, it was time for the heat treat. I used my small forge to get the steel up to temperature. O1 tool steel stops becoming magnetic when it's at the right temperature. Once it had reached this, I let them soak at this temperature for about 5 minutes and quenched each blade in some vegetable oil. and then tempered them in the oven for around 2 hours at 200 degrees. Once they'd cooled down, back at the grinder I removed any of the fire scale and put in the final bevels. And then it was time for hand sanding. I started off back at about 80 grit and worked all the way up to 2000. This took absolutely ages. I think I spent around 6 hours in the end on both knives. For the handle I wanted to use Wenge wood. I think it's a beautiful dark wood that will really contrast the copper nicely. At the bandsaw I cut out the sizes I needed. And added some registration marks with a Sharpie so I could keep track of them. Using the mitre fence, I added a 30-degree cut along the width of the blade. I wanted to use some 3mm thick copper for the inlay. I marked out the sizes I needed and cut them down. I started with the angle grinder and then realised that the hacksaw worked just as quickly. I mixed up some 5-minute epoxy and put it on the wood and the copper. It was at this point I realised that I couldn't add any clamps because it just kept slipping, so I added some masking tape to hold it together. I've used the masking tape trick quite a few times in woodworking and it works absolutely fine there. Unfortunately, the second I took this over to the grinder to start trying to tidy it up, it just completely fell apart. I just don't think the tape was making enough pressure to hold it together. So I knocked up a quick little clamping jig. It's basically some scrap plywood with 4 little blocks to stop any side-to-side movement of the wood. Again, I mixed up some more epoxy, and this time I could use a clamp to make some real pressure. When I took it out of the jig, it seemed to be holding up absolutely fine, but again, as soon as I took a file to it, it just fell apart. Plan B was some 90-degree cuts straight down the middle. I also roughed up the edges before adding the epoxy just to give it some more surface to grip onto. This time it held perfectly. I'm using some more copper for the spacers. This is some 0.7mm thick copper. I cut this down to size and covered the back of the handle in more epoxy and stuck this onto the copper spacer. I tidied up all the edges and made all the copper flush back on the bench grinder. I taped the two halves of the handle together and used the knife to mark out exactly where I needed to drill the holes. I took it nice and slow, remembering I was going through 2 pieces of wood and 2 pieces of copper. I trimmed some 4mm copper rod down to size to use as the pins. And then I used the very last of my epoxy to glue up all the handles. I sit and let this cure for a couple of hours before starting to work on it again. The blade itself was relatively sharp, so I just covered it in some cloth and tape. I used a mixture of hand filing and the belt grinder to shape the handles. I had to be really careful when I got to any of the bits of copper. Copper is a really great conductor of heat, which meant that as soon as it got hot, it stayed hot. I also had to take it really slow, because if you get the epoxy too hot, it runs the risk of melting, and I'd done just about enough glue up of these handles. I then hand sanded them until they were nice and smooth. Couple of coats of oil and finish them with my beeswax finish. I'm really happy with how these turned out. I think they look absolutely stunning. And well, there's only one way to test a steak knife. For a list of items and materials used, check out the written guide. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like, share and subscribe.